I spent the entire semester anticipating this moment. The familiar creak of the screen door, the scent of pine needles mixed with the salty breeze from the lake, and the sight of our old summer house standing proud among the towering trees. I hadn't been back home for a few months since university kept me busy, but here I was, finally on summer break, ready for a peaceful escape. Mom was the first to meet me at the door. Her smile was the same as always, warm, welcoming, but something about it lingered longer than I remembered. She hugged me tight, her hand stroking my back as if she was making sure I was really there, really her little boy coming back to her. I noticed she held on a second longer before letting me go, stepping back with a slightly embarrassed laugh. "Look at you," she said, her eyes scanning me up and down. "You've grown so much. I barely recognize you." I smiled awkwardly, brushing it off. "Yeah, college does that, I guess." We spent the first day falling back into old routines. She cooked dinner while I unpacked, the familiar clinking of pots and pans echoing through the house like a soothing lullaby. It felt good to be home, away from the chaos of the city and university life. As we sat down to eat, I realized just how much I missed these moments. It was simple, just me and Mom like old times. Her eyes watched me carefully as we talked about school, friends, and my plans for the summer. I noticed the way she leaned closer whenever I spoke, her hand occasionally brushing against mine as she reached for the salt shaker or her glass of wine. Could have been innocent, but there was something different about the way she looked at me. Her gaze was softer, more intense, lingering a moment longer than necessary. I pushed the thought away. It had been a long semester, and I was probably just imagining things. After dinner, she suggested we watch a movie together. It was something we hadn't done in years, but I couldn't say no. We settled into the couch, the dim lighting of the living room casting a cozy glow. She curled up beside me, closer than I expected, her head resting gently against my shoulder. I felt a strange comfort, but also an unease I couldn't place. Halfway through the movie, I felt her hand slip into mine. It was a small gesture, something she used to do when I was a kid. But now, as an adult, it felt different. I glanced at her, and she met my eyes with a soft smile, squeezing my hand gently. My heart skipped a beat, a warmth spreading through me that felt unfamiliar and confusing. "Mom," I whispered, unsure of what I was feeling. "Yes, sweetie?" Her voice was calm, soothing. I hesitated, not knowing what to say. The words got stuck in my throat, tangled up with emotions I wasn't ready to face. She just smiled again, leaning her head against my shoulder, her fingers still intertwined with mine. "It's nice having you home," she murmured. "I've missed this." I swallowed hard, nodding silently. "Yeah, me too." We stayed like that for the rest of the movie, the tension between us growing thicker with every passing second. By the time the credits rolled, I could hardly breathe. I gently pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly. "I think I'm going to head to bed," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm pretty tired." "Of course," she replied, her smile faltering for a split second before she masked it with her usual warmth. "Good night, honey." I barely made it to my room before the confusion and unease hit me like a wave. I shut the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. It was nothing, I told myself. I was overthinking it. But the look in her eyes, the way she held onto my hand, it didn't feel like nothing. The next morning, I tried to act normal, pushing the awkwardness of the previous night out of my mind. Mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made breakfast. She looked up as I walked in, her smile bright and welcoming, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, handing me a plate of pancakes. "I thought we could go for a hike today. Like we used to." I hesitated for a moment, but then I nodded. "Yeah, sure. That sounds nice." We drove to the old trail by the lake, the one we used to visit every summer. The path was shaded by tall trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was beautiful, peaceful, just like I remembered. We walked side by side, talking about old memories, laughing about silly things from my childhood. But every now and then, the conversation would pause, leaving a silence that felt heavier than it should. At one point, We reached a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. I stopped to take it in, feeling the breeze on my face, the sun warming my skin. Mom stood beside me, her eyes fixed on me rather than the view. "You've grown into such a handsome young man," she said quietly. I turned to look at her, startled by the tone of her voice. It was soft, almost wistful, filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Thanks," I replied awkwardly, shifting on my feet. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, her touch lingering longer than it should have. My heart raced, and I took a step back, trying to create some distance between us. "Mom," I said, my voice shaky, "we should probably head back. It's getting late." She nodded slowly, her eyes still locked on mine. "Yes, of course," she said, her smile faltering for a brief moment before she turned away. We walked back in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words and emotions I wasn't ready to face. I knew something had shifted between us, something we couldn't ignore, and as much as I wanted to pretend everything was fine, deep down I knew that nothing would be the same after this summer. The drive home was silent, the tension from the hike lingering like a shadow that neither of us acknowledged. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, my mind replaying the moment when her fingers brushed against my cheek. It had felt different, more than a mother's touch, almost like something forbidden. Mom glanced over at me once or twice, her expression unreadable. I could feel her eyes on me, like she was searching for something, waiting for a sign or a signal that I couldn't give her. I turned up the radio, hoping the music would drown out the confusing swirl of emotions in my head. By the time we got back to the house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The golden light made everything look softer, almost dreamlike, but the unease I felt was as sharp as ever. I wanted to retreat to my room, to hide from whatever was happening between us, but she called out to me as I headed down the hall. "Why don't you stay for a bit?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "We could sit outside, watch the sunset like we used to." There was something in her tone that made it hard to say no. I nodded reluctantly, following her out onto the back porch. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the lake reflecting the colors like a mirror. It was beautiful, peaceful, a scene out of a perfect summer memory. But everything felt heavy, charged with an unspoken energy I couldn't ignore. We sat down on the porch swing, the wood creaking beneath our weight. She leaned back, her hand resting just inches away from mine on the armrest. For a while, we didn't speak, just watched the sun sink lower behind the treetops. "You know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's been so quiet around here without you. I didn't realize how much I'd miss having you around." "I've missed being here too," I replied honestly, but there was a hesitation in my voice, a crack that I hoped she didn't notice. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place, something between sadness and longing. "You've grown up so fast," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I look at you, and it's like I don't even recognize you anymore." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I'm still me, Mom," I said softly. "I'm just older now." Her gaze lingered on me, her eyes searching mine, as if she were looking for something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could give her. "Yes," she murmured. "You are." Silence fell between us again, but it wasn't the comfortable kind. It was thick, almost suffocating. The only sound was the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant calls of birds settling down for the night. I could feel the air between us shift, like something was about to break, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. "Have you ever felt like—" She trailed off, biting her lip as if she were trying to find the right words. "Like there's something between us that's changed? Something we don't talk about?" My heart skipped a beat, a rush of panic and confusion washing over me. I knew what she was asking, what she was hinting at, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Instead, I looked away, staring out at the lake, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Mom, I don't—" I struggled to find the words, my voice trembling. "I don't know what you mean." She reached out then, her fingers brushing against the back of my hand. It was a light touch, but it felt like a jolt of electricity, sending shivers up my spine. "You do know," she whispered, her voice almost pleading. "I think we both know. We just don't want to admit it." I pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly, the swing rocking behind me. "This is crazy," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "You're my mother. We can't. This isn't right." Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something like pain in her eyes. "I know it's not," she said, her voice breaking, "but I can't help how I feel. And I don't think you can either." I took a step back, shaking my head as if I could somehow shake off the feelings swirling inside me. "I don't feel that way," I lied, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. She stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Then why are you so afraid to look at me?" she asked quietly. "Why do you pull away every time I touch you?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was a mess of conflicting emotions. Fear, confusion, a twisted kind of desire I didn't want to acknowledge. I turned away, staring out at the darkening sky, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I think I should go," I said finally, my voice strained. "I need some space." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand," she said softly. "But please, don't leave like this. Just sit with me a little longer." I hesitated, torn between the urge to run and the pull of something I couldn't name. Finally, I gave in, sinking back down onto the swing. She sat beside me, closer this time, her shoulder brushing against mine. Neither of us spoke, but the silence between us was louder than any words could have been. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. I could feel her warmth beside me, the soft rise and fall of her breath, and despite everything, I didn't pull away. We sat there together in the growing darkness, two people caught in a moment that felt like the edge of something dangerous and irreversible. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to step back or let myself fall. The following days were filled with an awkward dance of avoidance and connection. We moved through the house like two magnets, constantly pulling toward each other, then snapping back with a jolt of guilt. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of hands, felt charged with an intensity that was almost unbearable. I tried to stay out of her way, burying myself in old books, taking long walks by the lake, anything to distract myself from the feelings that were now impossible to deny. But it seemed that no matter how hard I tried to keep my distance, I always found myself drifting back to her, drawn by a force I didn't understand and couldn't control. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV without really watching it. The rain tapped against the windows like a soft drumbeat, the gray sky casting a muted light across the room. I heard her footsteps behind me before I saw her, and when I turned, she was standing in the doorway, looking hesitant and uncertain. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice almost timid. I nodded, unable to find my voice. She walked over and sat beside me on the couch, close but not touching, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I could feel the warmth of her body, the scent of her perfume mingling with the fresh rain from outside. We sat there in silence for a while, the sound of the rain filling the space between us. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said quietly, not looking at me. "So have I admitted, staring down at my hands. She took a deep breath, like she was steeling herself for whatever she was about to say. "I know it's wrong. I know we shouldn't feel this way." Her voice wavered, and I could see the struggle etched on her face. "But I can't stop." The words hung in the air like a confession, raw and unfiltered. I turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in her eyes broke something inside me. It was like she was asking for permission, for validation that she wasn't alone in this. "I can't stop either," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted between us. It was like the last barrier had fallen, and all the emotions we'd been trying to suppress came rushing to the surface. Before I knew it, she was leaning in closer, her hand reaching out to cup my cheek. Her touch was soft, hesitant, as if she were afraid I might pull away. But I couldn't. Instead, I leaned into her touch, closing my eyes as I felt the warmth of her palm against my skin. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, even though I knew it was anything but. I opened my eyes to find her watching me, her gaze filled with a mix of fear, longing, and something else, something deeper, more primal. Without thinking, I reached up and took her hand in mine, bringing it to my lips. I pressed a gentle kiss to her palm, feeling her shiver under the touch. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like we were crossing yet another line we could never go back from. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hushed, almost pleading. "Because once we do this, I'm sure," she whispered, cutting me off. Her voice was breathless, filled with a kind of desperation that matched my own. I've never been more sure of anything. That was all the permission I needed. In one fluid motion, I pulled her closer, my hand slipping to the back of her neck as I pressed my lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, as if we were both afraid of shattering the fragile moment. But then she sighed against my mouth, and all the tension between us broke like a dam. She kissed me back with a fervor that took my breath away, her hands tangling in my hair as she pulled me closer. It was clumsy, frantic, filled with years of suppressed emotions bubbling to the surface all at once. I could taste the salt of her tears, mingling with the rain that still drummed against the windows. "God, I've wanted this," she murmured against my lips, her voice shaking. "I've wanted you for so long." I pulled back just enough to look at her, my hands framing her face. Her eyes were glassy with tears, her cheeks flushed, and I realized she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Me too," I admitted. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but she pressed her fingers to my lips, silencing me. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't say it. Just be here with me." I nodded, swallowing hard as I felt the gravity of what was happening. I kissed her again, softer this time, taking my time to memorize the way her lips felt against mine. It was intoxicating, the way she melted into me, like she was giving me everything she had. We moved together in a daze almost instinctively. I don't know how we ended up in her room, the door closing softly behind us. The rain outside had intensified, the sound of it pounding against the roof like a heartbeat, matching the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. She pulled me onto the bed, her hands never leaving my skin. It was slow at first, tender, as if we were afraid of breaking each other. But the hesitation didn't last long. The unspoken need between us took over, and everything else faded away. There were no words, no explanations, just the raw, primal connection we'd been fighting against for so long. When it was over, we lay tangled together in the dim light, the rain still drumming a steady beat above us. I could feel her breath against my chest, soft and even, her fingers tracing lazy circles on my skin. It was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. But beneath the calm, there was a current of something darker, something I knew we'd have to face eventually. "I don't regret it," she whispered, breaking the silence. "Do you?" I hesitated, staring up at the ceiling. I knew the answer should have been yes. I knew I should have felt guilt, shame, something. But as I held her close, her warmth seeping into me, all I felt was relief, like I'd been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. "No," I said quietly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I don't regret it." She smiled, a small, sad smile, as if she knew this moment was fleeting. "Neither do I." We fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the sound of the rain washing over us like a lullaby. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. But even in my dreams, I knew this was only the beginning, and whatever happened next, we'd have to face it together.